On a routine flight, a teenage girl named Maya, a first-class passenger, sits quietly in her seat, waiting for her drink. She's calm, polite, and excited for the journey ahead, anticipating the reunion with her father, Marcus, at the destination. The cabin is filled with the usual noise of passengers settling in, flight attendants making their rounds, and the hum of the plane as it cruises through the sky. Maya, dressed in casual attire that blends in effortlessly, has boarded this flight alone. It's something she's done many times before, and there's no reason to expect anything out of the ordinary. The flight attendants move gracefully through the aisles, offering drinks with a smile to the passengers. Among them is Rebecca, a senior flight attendant who is known for her strict adherence to the rules and her precise, no-nonsense approach to service. Her uniform is immaculately pressed, and her posture exudes authority. As she makes her way down the aisle, Rebecca serves drinks to the passengers in first class, ensuring everyone has their choice of beverage. When she reaches Maya's row, however, something shifts. While other passengers are offered fresh juices, Maya is overlooked. Rebecca, without a moment's hesitation, skips her row, continuing down the aisle without giving Maya a second glance. Maya, confused by the sudden denial, tries to make a polite request. With a small, unsure smile, she calls out, "Excuse me, could I please have some juice?" The flight attendant, however, does not acknowledge her, and instead, continues serving other passengers. Maya is left sitting there, feeling increasingly uncomfortable, wondering why she was the only one who wasn't given what she asked for. There's no immediate explanation, no apology or reasoning behind the refusal. The more she thinks about it, the more she realizes that this denial isn't about a simple mistake, it's about being treated differently, even though she's a first-class passenger like the others. As Maya watches the flight attendants move along, she's filled with a mix of confusion, embarrassment, and anger. She is well aware of the situation, she has experienced instances of prejudice before, and this feels all too familiar. Still, she tries to keep her composure, reminding herself that the journey isn't about this small moment but about reuniting with her father. But something about the situation doesn't sit right with her. The uncomfortable feeling grows stronger, and she wonders why she's being singled out. In that moment, what started as a simple request for juice evolves into something deeper, a subtle, but glaring, reminder of the biases that still permeate society. Little did Rebecca know that the young girl she had just refused was about to bring about a change that would shake the very foundations of the airline. Maya, still perplexed by the incident, pulls out her phone and quickly types a message to her father, Marcus. She tells him that the flight attendant, Rebecca, had refused to give her juice, and that it was the only time she had ever been treated like this on a flight. Her fingers hover over the keyboard as she tries to explain how it wasn't just about the juice, it was the subtle but undeniable feeling that she didn't belong in first class. As she waits for her father's response, the weight of the moment sets in. Maya isn't the type to stir up trouble. She's always tried to fit in, to blend into the background. But this time, the treatment felt unjust. She could feel the judgment in Rebecca's eyes, even though it was masked behind a polite smile. The rest of the passengers in first class don't seem to notice anything amiss. They are too busy with their own activities, reading, talking, and enjoying their drinks. But Maya feels an uncomfortable distance from them, as if she is somehow separate, an outsider in a place where she should belong. Her hands shake slightly as she places her phone back in her bag, but her thoughts are interrupted by the soft buzz of a new message. It's from Marcus. "What's the flight number?" the message reads. Maya's heart pounds as she quickly scans the information on the boarding pass. She types the details into her response, her fingers trembling slightly as she presses send. Her father's next message comes in swiftly. Stay calm. I'll handle this. Maya feels a sense of relief wash over her. Marcus is the one person who always knows what to do. He is a man of influence, well respected, and powerful in his own right. If anyone could handle this situation, it's him. Meanwhile, Rebecca moves about the cabin, unaware that the simple act of denying service to Maya is about to spark a chain of events she never could have predicted. Her earlier behavior has set off an alarm within Maya's family, and Marcus, with all his resources, is now fully aware of the unfair treatment his daughter has faced. As Rebecca walks past Maya again, she feels an eerie tension in the air. The situation has already started to shift, and Rebecca is about to find out just how wrong she was. The flight seems to go on forever as Maya sits silently in her seat, waiting for her father's response. Her phone rests quietly in her lap, but she's acutely aware of the distance between herself and the other passengers in first class. Despite the calm and efficiency of the flight, something feels off. Maya can feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, making her second-guess every step that led her to this moment. Rebecca, still moving through the aisles with practiced precision, approaches a few rows away. Maya watches the flight attendant with a mixture of frustration and quiet determination. Maya had expected professionalism, something she has always encountered on flights, but instead, she had been met with dismissal and coldness. The fact that her request for juice was ignored, while every other passenger received theirs, made it clear, she wasn't being treated like everyone else. Maya shifts uncomfortably in her seat, the sense of humiliation creeping in as she notices how Rebecca's eyes briefly flicker over to her. There's no warmth, no recognition of her presence as a paying customer. Just a quiet judgment, something Maya knows all too well as a young black woman. She tries to push the feeling aside, but it lingers, making her question whether this would have happened if she were someone else, someone whose presence was less likely to challenge the system Rebecca had so firmly placed herself within. A few moments later, Maya's phone buzzes, and she jumps slightly, a little startled. It's a new message from her father, Marcus. Stay calm. I've already contacted the airline. It will be handled shortly. Relief floods her chest, but it's mixed with a simmering sense of anger. She had never imagined a situation like this could happen, and yet, here she is, on the receiving end of something she knew was deeply wrong but couldn't yet articulate. Marcus's response gives her confidence, but her anger still simmers. Rebecca comes down the aisle again, this time more briskly than before, still unaware of the storm that's about to unfold because of her careless actions. As Rebecca approaches Maya's seat, she hesitates, her gaze flickering toward Maya for the briefest moment. She looks away just as quickly, but the tension between them is palpable. This time, Maya doesn't hesitate. She looks directly at Rebecca, no longer playing the role of a quiet, obedient passenger. Her calm gaze meets the flight attendant's, but this time, there's no smile. Rebecca's nervous glance is all the confirmation Maya needs, things have already shifted. The question now is just how far the ripples will spread. The air in the cabin grows tense as Rebecca notices Maya's steady, unwavering gaze. Maya is no longer the polite, unassuming passenger she was before. There's an unspoken acknowledgement between them now. As Rebecca nears her row, Maya's eyes never leave hers, quietly challenging the flight attendant's behavior. Rebecca, visibly uncomfortable, hesitates mid-step, her professional composure cracking slightly. Without saying a word, Rebecca hurries past, her steps quickening as she moves further down the aisle. Maya watches her retreating figure with a mix of satisfaction and frustration. She can feel the weight of the passengers' eyes, though none dare to speak up. The silence in the cabin is deafening, but it feels like the calm before a storm. A few minutes pass before the intercom crackles to life, a low, authoritative voice filling the cabin. "Rebecca, please report to the cockpit immediately." The suddenness of the announcement catches everyone's attention, and a few heads turn as passengers exchange confused glances. Maya's grip tightens around her phone. The tension has built to a point where she can't ignore it any longer. What had started as a simple interaction had now escalated. She can feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest, but she knows it's not just about the juice anymore. It's about dignity, respect, and the deep-seated biases that have shaped this interaction from the start. Rebecca pauses at the galley, looking confused and startled by the call. She tries to compose herself, smoothing her uniform and adjusting her posture before making her way toward the cockpit. The footsteps behind her echo down the aisle as passengers wait in anticipation. Maya watches her every movement with a quiet resolve. This moment may have started with a simple mistake, but it's clear now that it's about much more than a misjudgment. It's about a failure to see people for who they truly are, to treat them with basic decency regardless of their background. When Rebecca finally disappears behind the cockpit door, Maya exhales deeply. She knows what's coming next, and her stomach churns with both dread and anticipation. She feels a sense of finality settle in, the moment of reckoning is drawing near. What had seemed like a small act of discrimination now feels like the catalyst for something much larger. Her phone buzzes once more, a message from her father, Marcus. "Don't worry. It's being handled. They won't get away with this." Maya's lips curl into a tight smile as she looks at the screen. This wasn't just about a simple juice request, it was about holding people accountable for their actions. And she was ready to see this through to the end. The minutes stretch on in a heavy silence as Maya waits in her seat, her posture unchanged but her mind racing. It's not just the refusal of a drink, it's the entire feeling of being marginalized, of being seen as less than others despite her rightful place in the first-class cabin. She knows the injustice goes deeper than this one incident, but this moment, this refusal, feels like the spark that will ignite something bigger. The cabin begins to feel smaller as Rebecca returns from the cockpit. Her expression is stiff, and she moves with an air of discomfort, as if the weight of the entire plane is on her shoulders. Maya watches her closely, knowing that Rebecca can't escape the scrutiny. The flight attendant's face betrays her unease, but she doesn't meet Maya's eyes. Instead, she glances at the other passengers, her composure falling apart bit by bit. Rebecca stops in front of Maya's row, her hands trembling as she holds the tray. She forces a tight smile, but there's no warmth in it. "Here's your juice," Rebecca says, her voice wavering. "I'm sorry for the confusion earlier." Her words, though polite, seem hollow, as if she's trying to rush through an apology she doesn't truly understand. Maya doesn't immediately respond. She's calm, but her thoughts are sharp. She knows what she wants to say, but she wants to make sure Rebecca hears every word. "There was no confusion," Maya says, her voice measured but firm. "It wasn't a mistake. You made a choice. You decided I didn't belong here. I wasn't worthy of the same service as everyone else." Rebecca's eyes flicker with guilt, but she doesn't speak. Her hands tighten around the tray as she tries to hold on to the last bit of control she has. Maya can see the wheels turning in Rebecca's mind as she struggles to find a way out of the situation. She's already failed, but she can't admit it, not yet. You were wrong, Maya continues, her words sharp but composed. And now you need to understand that it's not just about this moment. It's about a system that lets people like you make these assumptions every day. It's about what you've been allowed to get away with, and how you've treated people like me for years. Rebecca flinches at the weight of Maya's words. Her silence speaks louder than any apology could. Maya takes the juice from her tray, her fingers brushing against Rebecca's hand for a brief moment, and slowly takes a sip. As she does, she watches the realization sink in. This wasn't just about a small mistake. It was about accountability, and for the first time, Rebecca is forced to confront the consequences of her actions. Maya sets the glass down with a quiet click, her gaze never wavering from Rebecca's face. This is not the end, it's the beginning of change. The rest of the cabin watches in tense silence, each person feeling the weight of the moment. The silence in the cabin grows thick as Maya takes another slow sip of her juice, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the glass. Rebecca stands there, rooted to the spot, her face flush with embarrassment and regret. Maya's calm demeanor only seems to heighten the tension, as if the entire cabin is holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The air feels heavy, charged with the quiet realization that something has shifted. What was once a routine flight has turned into a reflection of a larger, more systemic problem. Rebecca begins to back away, her movements stiff, as if trying to distance herself from the confrontation. She quickly retreats down the aisle, but the quiet murmurs of the other passengers make it clear that they've all been silently watching the exchange. Their eyes follow her, but they all remain silent, perhaps unsure of how to react. Maya remains still, her gaze unwavering as she watches Rebecca's retreating figure. There's no sense of triumph in her, no satisfaction in having forced the flight attendant into this moment of realization. Instead, Maya feels a quiet, almost sorrowful weight pressing down on her. She's seen this before, people making snap judgments, casting others aside without a second thought. It's not new to her, but that doesn't make it any easier to accept. As Rebecca disappears into the galley, Maya pulls out her phone again, her fingers moving over the screen as she types a message to her father. The briefest of pauses, and then the familiar 3 dots appear, signaling a reply. Her father, Idris, had been following the situation from the moment she had texted him. Now, he's asking for the flight number, his voice calm but clearly concerned. The message comes through quickly. Do they understand yet? Maya smiles slightly at the screen, then types her response. Not yet, but I think they will soon. She sets the phone down and leans back in her seat, watching the rest of the flight unfold around her. The announcements, the drinks being served, the laughter of a few passengers in the back, everything seems to carry on as if nothing has changed. But for Maya, everything has shifted. This wasn't just a simple issue of juice, it was a reminder of how easily people could be dismissed, how quickly they could be judged based on assumptions alone. The overhead speaker crackles to life, announcing a slight delay as they prepare for the descent. Maya looks around the cabin again, wondering how many of the passengers had noticed what had just transpired. How many had thought about what it means to be treated differently simply because of who you are? Her fingers tap rhythmically on the armrest, knowing that, in this moment, her father's power was about to have its own impact. The flight wasn't over yet, and neither was this fight. The fight for fairness, respect, and equality, which was now more than just a private conversation, it was public. As the flight continued its descent toward its destination, the air in the cabin grew heavy with anticipation. Passengers could sense that something was amiss. Maya sat still in her seat, her expression unreadable, as Rebecca moved through the aisles, her steps hurried and unsteady. The subtle glances, the hushed whispers, and the weight of judgment in the air were palpable, and Rebecca could feel every eye trained on her as if they were all waiting for the fallout. Maya, however, remained calm. She had long since learned that being a well-dressed, young black woman in certain spaces meant that people would either question her presence or, like Rebecca, make assumptions about her worth. But today, she had the power to turn the tables. The reality was simple: Maya didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. Her father's influence was enough to unravel everything. Rebecca, meanwhile, was becoming more uncomfortable by the second. Her usual control over the cabin, the authority she wielded so easily before, was slipping through her fingers. She could no longer ignore the truth of what she had done. Her mistake, her judgment, had been exposed, and it was clear she had misjudged not just Maya, but the entire situation. As the final moments of the flight drew near, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that the tables had turned, and her career hung in the balance. Back in the galley, she found herself standing frozen, hands trembling as she prepared to make the next move. The intercom crackled again, but this time, it wasn't just a routine announcement. The captain's voice, usually composed, carried a note of finality as it echoed over the loudspeakers. "Miss Keaton, please report to the cockpit immediately." Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. The call wasn't just routine. This was something else, something far more serious. She quickly adjusted her uniform, smoothing out every wrinkle, trying to regain a semblance of composure. She walked briskly down the aisle, avoiding the eyes of the passengers who, she was certain, had already heard about the incident. She was too afraid to look around, her anxiety rising with every step. As she entered the cockpit, the atmosphere was different. The captain and first officer were already there, waiting for her. The door closed behind her with a heavy thud, and before she could say anything, the captain spoke up. "Do you know who that passenger was?" Rebecca's mind raced, but she didn't dare speak. The captain's question was a loaded one. He already knew the answer. Maya wasn't just any first-class passenger, she was the daughter of Idris, the man who owned the entire airline. The realization hit Rebecca like a ton of bricks, and for the first time in her career, she felt small, insignificant. "You've made a serious mistake, Miss Keaton," the captain continued, his tone colder than Rebecca had ever heard it. "We'll handle this when we land. But you need to understand the consequences of your actions." Rebecca's stomach twisted in knots. The weight of her mistake wasn't just professional, it was personal. She had judged someone based on their appearance, and now the truth had come out. And there was no going back. The plane touched down, its wheels screeching slightly as it made contact with the runway, signaling the end of a flight that had started with unease and was now steeped in consequences. Rebecca's hands tightened around the edge of the galley counter, her heart racing with each passing second. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, she could feel the tension mounting in her chest. This wasn't just any landing, it was the moment her career, her reputation, and everything she had built in the airline industry would be under scrutiny. Maya, on the other hand, sat quietly, the definition of calm composure. She wasn't smug, nor was she angry. She was just waiting for the inevitable fallout to unfold. She could sense Rebecca's discomfort from across the cabin, but her focus wasn't on the flight attendant's internal panic. It was on the bigger picture. Her father's power was about to bring this situation into the light, and nothing would ever be the same again. As the plane came to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Rebecca hesitated, still gripping the counter as if it would anchor her to the reality she knew was slipping away. The murmurs of passengers surrounded her, their whispers growing louder as they exchanged glances and passed judgment. Some talked in hushed tones, while others didn't even bother to hide their thoughts. Rebecca felt the sting of every word and glance, each one a reminder of the power Maya had just unleashed. When the door finally opened, the security officer appeared at the front of the cabin. His broad frame stood in stark contrast to Rebecca's shrinking figure. She tried to steady herself, forcing her shoulders back and walking toward him, though every step felt like it was dragging her closer to the judgment she knew was coming. "Miss Keaton," the officer's voice was firm but professional. "You'll need to come with me." The words struck her like a hammer. There was no escape now. As she followed the officer down the narrow aisle, she noticed the eyes on her, the curiosity mixed with a sense of satisfaction. They knew, and they were watching her every move. For the first time, Rebecca felt what it was like to be on the receiving end of judgment and discrimination. The walk toward the gate seemed endless. She had no choice but to keep her head high, though inside, her thoughts were swirling. She had assumed power and control, always choosing who to treat with respect, who to ignore, and who to judge. Now, she was faced with the consequences of that power, consequences that were beyond her control. As she approached the exit, a chilling realization settled in: her actions were no longer a simple mistake to be corrected. This was the beginning of her downfall. The meeting that awaited her with airline executives would likely be the end of her career, and she could do nothing but face it head-on. The door to the small conference room clicked shut behind Rebecca, and for a brief moment, everything felt muted. The quiet hum of the aircraft's engines had faded, replaced by the sharp silence of the room. She stood there, hands clasped tightly in front of her, forcing herself to appear composed even though her mind was racing. Her career, her future, and her entire identity had been reduced to one mistake, a mistake that was now about to unravel everything. At the head of the table sat Maya's father, Idris Carter. His gaze was cool, calculating, but there was a hint of something more: disappointment. Next to him, Damon Whitaker, the airline's chief operating officer, sat with an air of cold professionalism, his pen tapping lightly against the table. The others around the room were equally quiet, their expressions unreadable. Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest as she stood before them, the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on her. She had known this moment was coming the second she was called to the cockpit, but the reality of it was far worse than she had imagined. She had been the one in charge of the first-class cabin, the one who decided who deserved better service, who deserved the premium treatment. But now, for the first time in her career, she wasn't the one holding the power. She was the one being judged. "Miss Keaton," Idris began, his voice firm but not unkind. "You've made a serious misjudgment today. One that cannot be overlooked." Rebecca swallowed, the dryness in her throat making it hard to speak. She knew what was coming, but hearing it from Idris made it feel more real. She wanted to explain herself, wanted to defend her actions, but the words wouldn't come. What could she say? She had made an assumption about Maya, based solely on her appearance, and it had cost her everything. "You looked at my daughter," Idris continued, his voice gaining strength, "and you made an assumption. You decided, without asking any questions, that she didn't belong. And because of that assumption, you treated her differently from every other passenger in that cabin." Rebecca's face burned with shame. She had treated Maya as though she was less deserving, less important, and now she had been exposed. She had thought she was in control, that her position as a senior flight attendant gave her the right to make those calls. But now, she realized, the system she had created had failed her, and the truth was staring her right in the face. "You will be suspended immediately," Damon said, breaking the silence. "We are conducting a full review of your actions. I trust you understand the gravity of the situation." Rebecca nodded, her breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined a simple act of prejudice would bring everything crashing down, but now, as she faced the consequences of her actions, she knew that her career, her reputation, and her place in the airline's hierarchy were all on the line. The meeting ended quickly, the executives rising from their seats. Rebecca stayed behind, alone with her thoughts. She had never felt so small, so powerless, and it was all because of a single choice, a choice that, in the end, had cost her everything. Rebecca stood in the empty conference room, the weight of her failure bearing down on her like a physical force. Her hands were still shaking, gripping the armrests of the chair in front of her as the finality of her suspension settled in. The door behind her opened, and Damon Whitaker stepped in. His expression was unreadable, the professional mask he always wore firmly in place. "Miss Keaton," he began, his voice devoid of empathy, "you've been a valued employee for years, but this incident is unforgivable. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, and your actions have crossed that line. You're suspended, effective immediately." Rebecca's stomach churned, but she refused to show weakness. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. She wanted to apologize, to explain, but there were no words that could undo what had been done. She had made a choice, a harmful one, and now she had to live with the consequences. Damon didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You'll remain on board until we land. Once we're on the ground, you'll be escorted to a formal meeting with our human resources team. From there, the investigation will begin." Rebecca nodded, her thoughts swirling. The humiliation was overwhelming. It wasn't just the fact that she had treated Maya unfairly, it was the realization that she had been so blind to her own biases. As a senior flight attendant, she had always prided herself on knowing how to navigate difficult passengers, how to maintain control in high-pressure situations. But she had failed Maya, and in doing so, she had failed herself. As the plane began its descent, Rebecca could feel the shift in the cabin. The passengers, once indifferent, were now whispering, their judgment palpable. The woman in the first row, who had been the most vocal about her service, caught Rebecca's eye. There was no anger in her gaze, only quiet certainty, as though she had always known that this moment would come. Rebecca's mind was a blur as she moved back down the aisle, performing the last bits of her duties with robotic precision. Every step felt heavy, every movement deliberate, but she couldn't escape the feeling that the passengers were watching her every move, waiting for her to crack under the pressure. When the plane finally touched down, the usual relief of landing didn't come. Instead, Rebecca felt a tight knot in her chest. She was no longer in control. The reality of her actions was now inescapable, and as she was escorted off the plane, the full weight of her mistake loomed large. This wasn't just about the flight. It was about everything she had built, her career, her identity, her pride, all of it was unraveling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The incident on the flight is a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked biases and the impact they have on individuals. It serves as a lesson in accountability, highlighting the importance of recognizing and addressing our assumptions, especially in positions of power. Just as Rebecca, the flight attendant, assumed Maya did not belong in first class based solely on her appearance, we all must be mindful of the judgments we pass on others. What may seem like a small mistake can have far-reaching consequences, affecting not just the individuals involved but the larger community as well. This story underscores the importance of confronting discrimination when we see it, and it reveals how power dynamics can easily distort our perceptions of others. Maya's composed response to the injustice, coupled with her father's timely intervention, shows that standing up against injustice, no matter how subtle, can lead to change. It reminds us that true power lies in respect, fairness, and understanding, rather than assumptions based on stereotypes. Let this be a lesson in empathy and self-awareness, taking the time to understand and listen to those we interact with, regardless of their background. Let us all strive to create spaces where people are treated with dignity and respect, and where we hold ourselves and others accountable for our actions. If you appreciate stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more insightful content. Your support means everything.